He was once the man El Chapo trusted most, a shadowy figure who knew the secrets of the Sinaloa cartel better than almost anyone else. Damaso Lopez Nunez, known as El Licenciado, did not rise through the ranks with guns blazing or corridos praising his violence. Instead, he came armed with a law degree, a sharp mind, and an uncanny ability to move between the worlds of politics, prisons, and organized crime. For years, he stood at El Chapo's side, orchestrating deals, smoothing over conflicts, and even engineering one of the most famous prison escapes in Mexican history. But power in the cartel world is fragile, and loyalty can vanish overnight. When El Chapo was finally captured, it seemed natural that his right-hand man would inherit the empire. Instead, what followed was betrayal, bloodshed, and a shocking decision that would shake the foundation of the drug war itself. El Licenciado not only turned on the Sinaloa cartel, he became the United States government's key witness against the very man who had once been his closest ally. So, who is this lawyer-turned-trafficker who betrayed El Chapo and changed the course of cartel history? How did he climb from a small-town boy in Sinaloa to the heights of the narco world only to bring it crashing down with his testimony? This is the story of Damaso Lopez Nunez, El Licenciado, the cartel insider who became its most dangerous traitor. Damaso Lopez Nunez was born in 1966 in the state of Sinaloa, the cradle of Mexico's most notorious traffickers. Unlike many of his future associates who grew up in extreme poverty and turned to the drug trade as their only escape, Lopez's early path looked different. He pursued education, studied law, and built a reputation as a man who understood rules, loopholes, and the very system designed to control crime. That law degree earned him the nickname that would follow him for life, El Licenciado the Graduate. For a while, he appeared destined for a respectable career, far removed from the blood-soaked hills of Sinaloa. But in Mexico, the line between the legal world and the underworld has always been thin, and Lopez was about to cross it. His first major step came not as a lawyer in courtrooms, but as a prison official. In the 1990s, he secured a position as deputy director at Puente Grande, one of Mexico's highest security prisons. It was there that fate placed him in direct contact with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, who at the time was serving a lengthy sentence. Lopez was no ordinary bureaucrat. Colleagues would later describe him as ambitious, calculating, and willing to bend rules when it served his interests. He struck up a relationship with El Chapo that went far beyond routine duty. Instead of guarding the infamous trafficker, Lopez became his ally, a facilitator who quietly ensured the boss enjoyed privileges behind bars. That alliance culminated in 2001 when El Chapo staged one of the most daring prison escapes in Mexican history. Hidden in a laundry cart, the kingpin rolled out of Puente Grande with shocking ease. Investigators would later allege that Lopez played a pivotal role, using his inside knowledge and position of authority to orchestrate the plan. Whether he masterminded the logistics or simply allowed it to happen remains debated, but one thing became clear: El Chapo owed him. That debt would forever change Lopez's destiny. After the escape, Lopez's life could no longer resemble that of a government employee. He resigned from his post, officially cutting ties with the system he had once sworn to uphold, and stepped fully into the world of organized crime. With his legal background, bureaucratic skills, and newfound alliance with the most powerful trafficker in Mexico, he became an indispensable asset to the Sinaloa cartel. For Lopez, it was not just about wealth, it was about influence, prestige, and stepping onto a stage where few from his background had ever stood. From this point, he was no longer simply a lawyer or a former prison guard. He was El Licenciado, the man who could bridge two worlds, the underworld of narcos and the institutions meant to stop them. His intelligence and cunning made him stand out in a cartel filled with violent gunmen. He wasn't the one pulling a trigger. He was the one opening doors, securing deals, and plotting strategies. That mix of brains and ambition set him apart and prepared him for the rise that was about to come. Once El Chapo escaped from Puente Grande, Damaso Lopez Núñez's role in the cartel shifted from quiet facilitator to trusted strategist. He was no longer just the man who opened a prison door, he became the architect of opportunities. With El Chapo back in command of the Sinaloa cartel, El Licenciado quickly proved his value not with displays of violence, but with the kind of intelligence and composure that few traffickers possessed. His education and background in law made him unique among cartel lieutenants, and El Chapo increasingly leaned on him for advice negotiation and the management of sensitive operations. Where others enforced power with bullets, Lopez reinforced it with brains. During the early 2000s, the Sinaloa cartel was in a fierce struggle against rivals like the Beltran Leyva organization and Los Zetas. Lopez carved out his position by handling logistics, smoothing over disputes, and forging alliances. He was adept at moving money across borders, laundering cartel profits through front companies, and ensuring that the Sinaloa empire expanded far beyond Mexico's rural heartlands. He cultivated ties not only with Mexican officials but also with networks in Central America, South America, and even parts of Europe. To El Chapo, he was invaluable, a man who could operate discreetly in boardrooms while still commanding respect among sicarios on the ground. His rise also owed much to the trust of the Guzman family. For years, Lopez acted as a bridge between El Chapo and external contacts, even helping to oversee the safety and integration of Chapo's family members into the business structure. He wasn't just an advisor. He was embedded in the cartel's inner circle. Rumors circulated that he was being positioned as the natural successor should anything ever happen to Guzman. In an organization where betrayal and ambition often spelled doom, Lopez maintained a reputation for loyalty and competence. He was seen as someone who could keep the cartel stable during turbulent times. But power within the Sinaloa cartel was never static. Lopez's influence grew precisely because El Chapo trusted him to handle situations others could not. He reportedly managed the cartel's distribution routes through Mexico City, which allowed him to control one of the most critical urban hubs for trafficking cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin northward into the United States. By some accounts, Lopez had his own independent structure within the cartel, commanding hundreds of men, and operating like a shadow organization under the larger Sinaloa umbrella. His strength lay not just in firepower but in organization and discipline. Yet, with this rise came whispers of envy and tension. Other powerful figures in the cartel, including El Chapo's own sons, known as Los Chapitos, viewed Lopez's growing stature with suspicion. They had bloodline claims to leadership, while Lopez had carved his place through loyalty and cunning. The seeds of future conflict were being planted even as he thrived. For the moment, however, his power seemed secure. He had influence, wealth, and the kind of respect that only came from years of proving himself indispensable. By the time El Chapo was captured again in 2014 and then recaptured in 2016 after another escape, Lopez was widely considered one of the most senior figures left standing. He had everything a cartel lieutenant could want: a vast empire, direct access to the leadership, and the resources to command entire territories. But with great power came inevitable confrontation. When Guzman was finally extradited to the United States in 2017, the question was no longer whether Lopez was powerful. The question was whether he could hold on to that power, or whether ambition and rivalry would drag him into a war that would change his life forever. The capture and extradition of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in 2017 created a vacuum at the top of the Sinaloa cartel, and into that void stepped Damaso Lopez Núñez. For years, he had been seen as the quiet strategist, the man who knew how to keep the machine running. Now, with the boss removed from the board, Lopez saw his chance to seize the crown. It was a move that seemed logical. He had the experience, the connections, and the respect. But in the brutal world of Mexican cartels, logic rarely prevails. What followed was not a smooth transition, but a bloody civil war that would expose the fragile loyalties of the Sinaloa Empire. At the center of the storm were El Chapo's sons Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzman, collectively known as Los Chapitos. Young, brash, and ruthless, they refused to let their father's right-hand man inherit what they saw as a family empire. To them, El Licenciado was an outsider, a man who had served his purpose, but who now threatened their birthright. Rumors swirled of tense meetings, heated exchanges, and ultimatums delivered in private. Soon, those rumors turned into open warfare. By 2017, Mexico was rocked by a series of high-profile clashes between factions loyal to Lopez and those aligned with Los Chapitos. Entire neighborhoods became battlegrounds. Gunmen loyal to El Licenciado reportedly carried out targeted assassinations against rivals, while the Guzman brothers retaliated with their own brutal tactics. One of the most chilling incidents occurred in May of that year, when Jesus Alfredo and Ivan Archivaldo were ambushed by armed men believed to be tied to Lopez's faction. Though they survived, the attack marked an irreversible break. The war for control of the cartel was now undeniable. As the violence escalated, so did the public perception of Lopez. He was no longer seen merely as a trusted lieutenant, but as a traitor to the family he had once sworn to serve. Newspapers painted him as a shadowy figure, orchestrating the betrayal of El Chapo's bloodline. Corridos ballads, often used to immortalize cartel legends, began to frame him, not as a hero, but as a usurper. In the narco world, reputation can be deadlier than bullets, and Lopez's reputation was rapidly shifting against him. The pressure intensified when authorities closed in. Mexican law enforcement, already emboldened by the extradition of El Chapo, turned its attention to El Licenciado. He became both hunted and besieged, chased by the government on one side and targeted by his former allies on the other. His once powerful faction began to fracture under the strain as defections, arrests, and killings thinned his ranks. For a man who had built his career on careful calculation, it was a dramatic fall into chaos. Perhaps the most telling sign of his decline was the fate of his own family. His son, Damaso Lopez Serrano, known as El Mini Leak, was caught in the middle of the bloody conflict. Once groomed to inherit his father's network, he found himself increasingly vulnerable. The younger Lopez would later surrender to U.S. authorities, a move that spoke volumes about the collapsing power of his father's empire. For El Licenciado, the turning point was not just about ambition gone wrong, it was about the deadly cost of overreaching in a world where loyalty is fleeting. By challenging Los Chapitos, he had underestimated the strength of blood ties and overestimated the durability of his own alliances. What began as a calculated grab for power spiraled into betrayal, bloodshed, and ultimately the unraveling of everything he had built. The stage was now set for the next chapter of his story, not one of dominance, but of downfall. For a man who began his career in the rigid world of law and prison bureaucracy, Damaso Lopez Núñez's transformation into a cartel boss was starkly visible in his lifestyle. Once seated behind desks and government paperwork, he now moved through lavish mansions, rode in convoys of armored SUVs, and entertained himself with the luxuries that only narco power could buy. His nickname, El Licenciado, symbolized refinement and intellect, and he carried that image into the way he built his empire. Unlike the flamboyant extravagance of some traffickers who flaunted tigers, gold-plated weapons, and ostentatious parties, Lopez preferred a quieter but no less imposing display of wealth. Reports described him surrounded by high-end properties in Mexico City and Sinaloa, using them both as safe houses and as symbols of power. His empire was not built solely on violence, it was sustained by financial sophistication. With his legal training, Lopez understood how to exploit loopholes, create shell companies, and funnel dirty money into clean businesses. This allowed him to move millions without drawing immediate attention, a skill that gave him an edge over less educated cartel lieutenants. His connections reached far beyond Mexico's borders. Through international smuggling routes, he ensured that cocaine from Colombia, heroin from the Golden Triangle of Mexico, and methamphetamine labs under his watch reached markets across the United States and Europe. Every successful shipment strengthened his standing, and every dollar laundered reinforced the perception that he was more than just a gunman. He was a cartel executive. Still, Lopez did not shy away from maintaining an image of intimidation. He reportedly surrounded himself with heavily armed bodyguards, their presence a reminder that his power was backed not just by intellect but by force. Corridos composed about him emphasized his role as a man of both brains and steel, someone who could command respect in business meetings and fear on the streets. His reputation became part of the Sinaloa brand, a fusion of ruthlessness and elegance. At the height of his influence, Lopez controlled significant territories, particularly in Mexico City, where his network was said to have operated like a shadow government. Authorities suggested that his faction handled large-scale trafficking operations through the capital, a strategic hub for both domestic and international distribution. This control gave him access not only to profits, but also to political connections, as the ability to move drugs undetected in Mexico's largest city required more than brute force. It demanded influence within law enforcement and local institutions. His family also enjoyed the benefits of his empire. His son, El Mini-Leak, lived a life of privilege, often showcasing expensive cars, designer clothes, and luxurious trips. Social media posts attributed to him painted a portrait of a second-generation narco raised in extravagance, insulated by his father's empire. But the very visibility of that wealth also made the Lopez family targets both for rival cartels and for authorities watching closely. Despite this outward success, the cracks in his empire were always there. Unlike El Chapo, whose myth grew from daring escapes and near-mythical survival, Lopez's image never fully captivated the masses. His style was effective, but lacked the raw charisma of Guzman. To his enemies, he was a calculating opportunist. To his allies, he was valuable but replaceable. His wealth and empire bought him temporary supremacy, but in the end, the very luxuries he enjoyed became symbols of vulnerability. Safe houses turned into traps, armored cars into cages, and bodyguards into liabilities once the government closed in. As his empire grew more fragile, Lopez was forced to confront the reality that no amount of money connections or luxury could shield him from the inevitable collapse that awaited those who reached too far in the violent chessboard of Mexican cartels. The downfall of Damaso Lopez Núñez was as swift as it was dramatic. For years, he had maneuvered with caution, avoiding the reckless mistakes that doomed so many cartel figures. But once he declared open war on Los Chapitos and positioned himself as the heir to El Chapo's empire, he became a target not only for rivals, but also for the Mexican state. By early 2017, his empire was crumbling under relentless pressure from both sides. His once loyal gunmen were being hunted down, his son was cornered, and his reputation as a calculating mastermind was fading fast. The decisive blow came in May 2017 when Mexican Marines stormed a luxury apartment complex in Mexico City. Acting on intelligence that placed Lopez in the capital elite forces, closed in on him with precision. Unlike the dramatic shootouts that mark the captures of other kingpins, this operation ended quietly. Lopez was taken alive unarmed and without resistance. For a man who had orchestrated El Chapo's legendary prison escape years earlier, being pulled out of an upscale high-rise in handcuffs was a cruel twist of fate. The images of him captured older, heavier, and far removed from his days as a powerful cartel boss spread quickly across the media. The lawyer who once outsmarted the system had finally been cornered by it. His arrest was only the beginning of a much larger collapse. Within months, U.S. authorities secured his extradition, determined to use him as a weapon against the very cartel he had helped build. Facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in an American prison, Lopez made a choice that stunned Mexico's underworld. He agreed to cooperate. In exchange for a lighter sentence, El Licenciado became a key witness for the U.S. government, offering testimony that directly implicated El Chapo and exposed the inner workings of the Sinaloa cartel. Inside the Brooklyn courtroom where El Chapo stood trial in 2019, Lopez's words carried the weight of betrayal. He described meetings, smuggling routes, payoffs, and the intimate details of Guzman's empire. For prosecutors, he was a goldmine of information. For the cartel world, he was the ultimate traitor. In the culture of narcos, loyalty is everything, and Lopez had broken the most sacred code by turning against the man who once trusted him above all. His testimony contributed to El Chapo's conviction, ensuring the Sinaloa boss would never walk free again. The reaction in Mexico was explosive. Cartel figures condemned Lopez as a rat, a man who had chosen survival over honor. Rumors swirled that his betrayal had not only sealed his own fate, but also put his family at risk. His son, Damaso Lopez Serrano El Mini Lick, surrendered to U.S. authorities that same year, seeking protection rather than facing the wrath of Los Chapitos. The once promising heir to Lopez's empire was reduced to a bargaining chip, his future tied to the same deal-making instincts that had defined his father. For ordinary Mexicans, Lopez's cooperation was a symbol of how fragile even the most feared cartels could be. Here was a man who once dined with billionaires, commanded armies, and lived in luxury, reduced to a government witness trading secrets for leniency. His fall underscored the paradox of cartel power: immense wealth and influence built on violence and corruption, only to be undone by betrayal and the relentless march of justice. Today, Damaso Lopez Núñez sits in a U.S. prison cell, his influence gone, his empire dismantled. To the world, he is remembered as the man who betrayed El Chapo, the lawyer-turned-trafficker, whose ambition ended not with a shootout, but with a quiet surrender to the system he once manipulated. His story is not one of triumph, but of a cautionary truth. In the narco world, power is fleeting, and betrayal always leaves scars that never heal. In the end, the story of Damaso Lopez Núñez is a portrait of ambition and betrayal. He began as a lawyer, a man who understood the rules of the system. He became a prison official who bent those rules, then the right hand of the world's most notorious drug lord, and finally the traitor who helped bring that empire crashing down. For years, El Licenciado lived in the shadows of power, balancing intellect with ruthlessness, building an empire that stretched across borders and generated fortunes measured in billions. Yet his downfall came not with a blaze of glory, but with silence, an arrest without resistance, a courtroom testimony delivered under oath, and a reputation forever marked by treachery. His journey is a reminder of the paradox at the heart of cartel power. Wealth and influence can buy loyalty, but only for a time. Violence can enforce fear, but it cannot erase ambition. And even the most trusted allies can become the deadliest traitors when survival is at stake. Today, Lopez is no longer the strategist moving pieces on the board. He is one of those pieces locked away, controlled by a system he once manipulated. So, how will history remember him? As the mastermind who betrayed El Chapo, or as just another name in the endless files of cartel informants who traded loyalty for survival? One thing is certain, his betrayal reshaped the war on drugs forever. This is Crime Lords Exposed. Real stories told unfiltered. Because what you don't see also controls the world.